Dear Tony, thank you so much for your time and availability to meet with me and have this conversation.
It's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to it.
Tony, Steve Jobs, in one of his most iconic speeches, once said, I quote, "Life is about connecting dots." Of course, it is impossible to connect the dots looking forward. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your life. You have to trust into something. Your guts, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life. End quote. Reading at your introduction on the Louis Masonic website, you tell us about how Freemasonry came into your life, and it seems to have happened as a bittersweet script. I quote, "The passing of my father, the discovery of his belonging to the craft. I became a Mason to look for my father, and I'm still here, now looking for myself. You may think that this is the same quest." End quote. Tony, do you see or recognize dots in your life path, and how do you connect them?
I'm sure I do. I mean, Steve Jobs was a hugely impressive character, wasn't he, by any standards? But and I'm sure he's right. You can only understand life backwards. But obviously, my father was hugely important to me, as you know, any father is to any son, I'm sure. But one's always the sum of all the things that's happened to one. You know, aren't we? We all are. I mean, you know, I had a tremendous education. I had a great job, you know. I mean, you know, it was a great privilege to do surgery. I enjoyed the technical aspects. I enjoyed helping my patients in moments of deep crisis. And yes, Freemasonry is really important to me. It's not so much a dot now as perhaps the string that holds all the rest of it together. I mean, I always get irritated by people who talk about it as a hobby. I mean, to me, it's a way of life, a system of living, if you like.
When you look back at the moment you saw those Freemasons at your father's funeral, and you look at yourself today, who's Tony Baker today? How have you evolved during your Masonic path?
Goodness. Well, I mean, I have to admit that when I looked at all those Freemasons in that church on that dreadful day, I did feel a sort of sense of anger, really. I felt that there was a huge part of my father, perhaps, that I didn't know. And yes, that's really why I joined Freemasonry. I didn't do so immediately. I mean, Freemasonry, when my dad was alive, you know, was really tremendously secretive, and my father wouldn't even talk to his son about it. So, you know, when I asked my dad about Freemasonry, what about joining? He'd say, well, you know, you might want to join if you admire the people you know who are Freemasons. And I thought, actually, you know, I'm never going to join an organisation where I don't know what it's all about before I go in. But yeah, I mean, who's Tony Baker today? Well, I mean, you know, the thing about the Western world is we all define ourselves by our jobs, don't we? I mean, you know, and so I'm a retired consultant vascular surgeon, and that job was a huge privilege, as I say. But I'm retired now, so my occupation is sort of less defining of me, I suppose. I mean, more recently, I don't know, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. But above all of that, you know, I'm an individual human being, and I believe I have a threefold nature, you know, body, soul, and spirit. And by soul, I mean, the trouble is people use these words in different ways, don't they? But right. By soul, I mean the psyche, I mean the sum total of my sort of non-physical aspects, really. And the modern world tends to all keep us at the body level, really, with occasional explorations of the soul, I suppose. But for me, Freemasonry teaches us about this triune nature of ourselves. I mean, for me, the lodge room is the biggest of all the Masonic symbols. You know, it's each one of us, and And we have to ask, why is that sacred symbol in the middle of the lodge room? You know, and it, for me, represents the divine spark, the third part of us, deep within each and every one of us. And our task is, I believe, to find that divine spark, to appreciate it, to get to know it, to bring it to the surface, bring it to the forefront, and allow it to take a more dominant role in our being human beings and in interacting with each other.
Yeah. Tony, while you have been delivering lectures during several years, your book, Freemasonry, Material, Moral and Mystical, is actually your first publication.
Yes.
What brought you to publish this book? And can you describe the experience of writing your first book? First of many, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, I didn't write a book just, straight away. I mean, what I did was, I think the thing that really started it all off was that I just became a bit dissatisfied with the answers I got from senior members of my lodge. Like I say, I was initiated in it's a fantastic lodge in Mid Wales, Powys Lodge in Welshpool, but not until 2 years after my father had died. And to start with, you listen to all the sort of operative masonry symbols, and you think about the history and how it arose from stone masonry, the tools and materials and so on. But then after a little while, the rituals began to whisper to me, there seemed to be a deeper message. But when I asked senior members of the lodge about such things, they'd always seem to fob me off. And it's not just this one lodge. I mean, it's lots of lodges and that I've been to and belonged to. So, you'd get told, well, it's all in the ritual, my boy, or, you need to go on to the next degree, or, oh, yeah, you'll find that in the Royal Arch, and, and on and on and on it goes. And so I became disappointed with these answers and thought, I need to do something to find out about this. And so I began to research on my own, as lots of thinking, seeking Masons do, I think. And I began to write papers, really to sort out my own thoughts, to make sure that, I wasn't thinking rubbish. And actually, when you start to write things down, you realise that some of the things you think don't actually really fit together. And it allows you to refine your thinking and to sort things out. And so, I wrote, well, gradually, I suppose I've written lots of papers, and I got asked to talk to lodges, I suppose, and then when I retired, I thought, I've got to do something now. First few months was like a holiday, and then I thought, what shall I do? And so I thought, well, I'll squeeze all these papers into a book then. And I really enjoyed the process, I have to say.
It sounds like, because I recognize a lot of what you're saying. I mean, the fact that you start writing something and that writing exercise sort of it forces is not the right word, but brings you to actually dig deeper into those thoughts and then looking for more answers. What I found fascinating in my small efforts into writing something, Tony, has been that there is a lot of publication. There are a lot of books that have been written across time since 1700, even before, and someone already started some of the line of thoughts where you are today. But you still find that line of thoughts requires effort and asking questions.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, I've often said, I think, everybody sort of makes an advancement, a daily advancement in Masonic knowledge listening to somebody's paper. But the person who makes the biggest advancement is the writer of the paper, actually. The person who has had to think about it and do the research.
I totally agree. In this exercise, Tony, Freemasonry today, 2021, post-COVID, looking into the future, does it still have a meaning or a purpose? What's your view on it?
Does Freemasonry still have a meaning or purpose? Antonio, of course it does. Emphatically, yes. Yes, I mean, my book is entitled Freemasonry, Material, Moral and Mystical. Well, but it has relevance at all of those levels, doesn't it? I mean, at the material level, you've got the fellowship that the lodge and chapter offer, which, it allows men of all religions and all cultures to meet and bond together in the common task of Masonic work, if you like. And what else can do that so effectively, honestly? The world, I think, is crying out for what Freemasonry has to offer in this respect, actually. And the fellowship may be all that some of our members need, and that's absolutely fine. But there's still the moral and the mystical levels. I mean, the moral level is the sort of make good men better level, isn't it? And I mean, that's, for me, probably true. It does do that. But on the other hand, you do have to be a good man to have joined in the first place, don't you? The tone of good report has to have been heard.
Correct.
In your favour. And I find actually the making good men better a bit of a trite sound bite, to be honest. But yeah. Anyway, moving on. The mystical aspect. I mean, again, I think that the prime purpose of Freemasonry is about moving closer to your maker, to understand your place in the creation. I mean, these are the teachings, I think, of the ancient mystery schools, and where else can you get this knowledge today? I think Freemasonry has a whole lot to offer. Yeah, I think the question is how to tell people who would benefit from it about what it has to offer. I mean, if you look on the internet, you see all this sort of poisonous stuff, don't you?
Exactly, and then this is one of the aspects that I would like to elaborate with you. If you look at today's way of educating, informing people in general, social media, the internet are key entry into seeking for knowledge. However, this is just an enchilada of everything. Truth, lies are mixed up in a cacophony where identifying purity of intent or honesty is more and more complicated.
Yes.
How can we help anyone seeking for honest and moral input find and see the differences?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, I think that Freemasonry needs to focus on its principles, really. But the problem is that there's no real agreement on what those principles are, is there? I mean, we've recently heard a suggestion that the United Grand Lodge of England should come up with a mission statement for Freemasonry. Well, initially that sounds like a good idea, but the more I think about it, the more I wonder whether it might not be a mistake, actually. I mean, the trouble with a mission statement is that if it doesn't include what you believe to be the main thrust of the organisation, then it's likely to alienate you, and you might end up losing a lot of members that way. I mean, it's sort of. It's like Solomon, in a way. I don't want to sound critical all the time, but the trouble with Solomon for me is that it's like a syllabus of Freemasonry, so that you think if you've looked at everything in Solomon, not that you could, but then you've kind of done it, ticked Freemasonry. But Freemasonry isn't like that. I mean, Freemasonry is so vast and so wonderful that each of us can plot his own path, his own journey through Freemasonry, and there can't be a syllabus, and I'm a bit worried about a mission statement from that point of view.
Thank you, Tony. Desiderius Erasmus published a book entitled Colleteana Adagiorum in Paris in 1500. This book opens with a proverb, quote, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king," implying that a little knowledge is better than ignorance, and that knowledge will open you doors for further research. I grew up being told this proverb, though in time and experience, I've added a second part to it. in the same land, that man, that king, he would be considered crazy and dangerous if isolated. He might probably be arrested, imprisoned, vilified, and so on. How can Freemasonry teaching rise above the cacophony that you described earlier? How can it be appreciated by those that are really seeking for perfection and don't just be a conspiracy theory?
Well, I mean, I think that Freemasonry, as I say, needs to stick to its principles, really, as I say. But you know, I'm not sure about your little knowledge thing. I think that's the way we all start, isn't it? On our path in Freemasonry, a little knowledge, you know, makes you look for a bit more knowledge. And I mean, the bibliography of Freemasonry is enormous. You know, it's thousands and thousands of books, and the internet, as I say, I just think's a little bit, you know, unreliable, really. I mean, you don't know whether you're looking at a friendly site or an unfriendly site to start with very often.
Yeah.
And it's surprising how much sort of antipathy Freemasonry has generated. I often wonder why that is, when really it's probably one of the greatest forces for good I've ever encountered in my life.
Tony, one of the pillars upon which Freemasonry is built, I think is in line with what you're suggesting now, is camaraderie, being together, communion.
Yes.
COVID-19 has brought us all, Freemasonry and society in general, to a halt. How have you experienced this period? And what's your take about how Freemasonry will restart and use this experience to build the future?
I fear I'm going to sound a bit of a skeptic here. I mean, I agree with you. I think Freemasonry is an experiential system, and the fellowship, the brotherly love, is a huge part of it. I mean, we can all sit at home in isolation, you know, chipping away at our rough ashlars and trying to make them perfect. But the fact is, at the end of the day, the operative stonemason, when he got his ashlar perfect, not that we ever any of us do that, but he didn't just pile them up in a pile at the side of the yard, did he? I mean, they have a function, perfect ashlars. They're to build with, they're to build a wall, a temple with. And the more perfect you can make your ashlar, then the thinner the layer of cement that you can bond it together with your you know, other perfect ashlars, your brethren. So I think, you know, you can do the work of Freemasonry is in two parts, really. I mean, some of it you can do on your own, but you can't do it all on your own. You have to go to lodge. You know, you can't build a temple, no matter how perfect your ashlar is, with just one ashlar. You know. So I think we do need our lodges and we do need our chapters, and I've missed mine enormously. But then, to be honest with you, I'm a bit of a hermit, really, and I've you know, lockdown hasn't been a huge problem for me. I mean, I've done a lot of writing. I've spent my career working as a surgeon collecting Masonic books with writing in retirement in mind. And I've now got basically 2 rooms full of these books, and I, you know, so I've got quite a lot of primary sources here myself, and so that's great. But you know, like many other researchers, I suppose I've ended up with a whole raft of questions I need to go to various libraries to answer now.
Yeah.
And you know, like everybody else, I've done a lot of Zoom meetings in lockdown. Yeah, run a few Masonic quizzes for my province to help bring them together. You know, yeah, I've enjoyed myself, Antonio. I can't say I've really suffered. I've been very lucky.
Sounds good. 2 final questions. You wrote the first book. What's your next project? Are you working already on something? Something that you can share with us, of course.
Well, yeah, the thing is, Antonio, that actually, I've just realised I haven't finished answering your last question.
Please.
You asked me how it's going to come out of lockdown. Who knew?
Yes.
And to be honest with you, I'm a bit worried about that because although I hope that lockdown has given people time to reflect, time to think about what's really important to them, and Freemasonry might very well benefit from that. But I believe in learning from the lessons of history, and the last great pandemic was the 1918-19 Spanish flu pandemic.
Yeah.
And I have to say, there have been a lot of lessons that could have been learned by our government and other governments if they'd studied what happened then more closely. But anyway, but after the 1918-19 pandemic, basically we had the Roaring Twenties, didn't we? So although everybody thought that that they might come out of it better, kind of thing, like we're thinking now, it was actually very rapidly forgotten, and we started the Roaring Twenties. So I'm a bit worried that Freemasonry might actually not take advantage of this. I mean, we're hearing at the moment, aren't we, that there's going to be a sort of membership drive launched later in this year or early next year.
Yeah.
And again, I'm a little bit worried that that's going to emphasize fellowship and charity, but make no mention of the spiritual aspects, which are so clear in the ritual. And the other thing is that, I don't know why this is, because actually the Grand Lodge's own surveys very often show that it's the spiritual aspects that the young are looking for in Masonry. I mean, I'm not saying it's the right thing for everybody, but surely we should cater for those who are looking for some deeper message, some spirituality.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. I think we should ignore it as an aspect of Masonry.
I agree with you. Thanks for actually come back to this part. It's I totally agree with your point. But I don't want that you're using this to avoid not to answer me. What's your next project?
No, not at all. Would I?
No.
Well, the thing is that I always have a lot of projects on the go at the same time. Some historical and some about interpreting our rituals and ceremonies. I think one of the things I've learned in writing is that it's an awful lot easier to start a project than it is to finish it. So I've got some projects, for instance, that I've had on the go for ages. I mean, just for instance, I mean, this is just for amusement's sake, really, but I tried to write a paper about how ill-equipped man is to understand God. And I've got the title, and I've tried it. I don't know how many times I've tried to write this. I've got loads and loads of drafts of it. It's called Integral Calculus for Slugs. Because,
it's a pretty interesting title.
Yeah, I like the title.
Yeah.
But writing the paper, I mean, it's just something that I hope I finish before I die. But, Anyway, so I've got a lot of projects on the go. I've got, I'm with one of my other lodge members, my Bristol Craft Lodge. We decided to write. We're coming up to the 150th anniversary of the lodge. It was consecrated in 1872. And so we've written a series of biographies of the early members. So it's their sort of life's story, really, and we've put them together in a volume. Unfortunately, it's about 600 pages at the moment, but
wow.
It's an interesting way of telling a lodge history, though, an unusual way. It's been an awful lot of work, great fun, but it makes a kind of living history. A lot of lodge histories on lists of meetings and charitable donations, and you fall asleep, don't you? But
Yeah.
But if you write about the lives of the members, you understand the kinds of people who are in the lodge, and you can imagine the kinds of discussions they were having. And, so I'm really enthusiastic about that, and I hope to get that out next year.
Sounds fascinating.
I'm trying to begin a history of the Masonic province of Bristol. There's a classic one that was published in 1910, so I'm going to try and do 1910 to 2020 sort of thing.
Okay. I think I saw that book, by the way. I think I saw
Yes,
it.
it's a big black book. The cover always falls off it.
Yeah.
So I'm quite interested in early evidence of spirituality as well.
Spirituality.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that. For instance, I mean, I'm writing about Anderson's constitutions at the moment because Quatuor Coronati wants a paper. It's the anniversary of 1723 in a couple of years. So Quatuor Coronati members are all being encouraged to write a paper on Anderson's constitutions of 1723. And I thought, how can I do that? I thought, and then I realised that
1723 is the second edition, right?
It's the first. Yeah, 1738 was the second. Yeah,
38 was the second. You're absolutely right. So apologies. Yeah. So
Sorry,
you're going
you
to
edit that out.
No. I like it. 1723. Interesting.
Yeah, but there are at least half a dozen examples in Anderson's constitutions. I mean, it's one of the earliest documents of organised Freemasonry, and there are at least half a dozen examples where he says things like, "But enough said," or "This can only be discussed in a lodge," or
Yeah.
So
vague references and
exactly. But people tell you all the time, "Oh, there was no spirituality in early Freemasonry, not at all. They just met and they all got drunk like Hogarth's illustration night. And the spirituality didn't come in until the late 18th century. And I don't know. It's just not good enough for me." So
I understand and I see your point. Question: when you do such a research work, you look at the work itself, or you will look at the work as the consequence of something. Example, Tony, we are the leaves, our parents are the branch, our grandparents are the body, and then go back into the history of your family. You have the roots. So the 1723 is the consequence of something. So who influenced him? Where did he find the source? Who was the Freemasonry before? Yeah. Are you also looking at that aspect, or you're looking literally only at the publication?
Well, I'm not actually looking at the publication itself. In fact, what I'm doing is a guy called Lionel Vibert, who was extremely well known in his time. He was twice Prestonian lecturer in the 1920s. I think he's the only person since COVID actually to have done 2 years, and he did 2 different lectures, where the current one is just the same lecture being carried on, isn't it? He edited Miscellanea Latomorum as well through the 1920s. I don't know whether you know that, but it's a fascinating publication. He was involved in the great controversy about the extended installation ceremony in 1926. I don't know if you know about it, but Grand Lodge banned the extended installation ceremony. I think they misunderstood what it was, actually. I think they thought it was passing the chair, and they thought it had already gone. So anyway, they banned it, and there was an uproar throughout the country in 1926. And Lionel Vibert, who was based in Bath, really, he'd come back to England from the Indian Colonial Service, and anyway, he was a huge authority, and he led the sort of deputation that went to Grand Lodge to explain to them that they'd made a huge mistake. And to their enormous credit, actually, they reversed the decision. So anyway, so Lionel Vibert wrote a paper in 1923. So that was the 200th anniversary of the 1723 constitutions in AQC. And he was really quite aggressive, really, in his dealing with both Anderson as a man and the constitutions. But so Vibert himself dealt with all the origins of the book. I mean, at one point he wrote Anderson was constitutionally unsuited even to be able to copy out his own text.
Wow.
That's pretty violent.
That's honesty. That's honesty of thoughts.
Yeah, it's not much brotherly love. It's the trouble with academics, isn't it?
Yeah. Wow, fascinating.
The other thing, actually, I'm really interested in is the spiritual messages in the higher degrees. I wouldn't mind writing about that sometime, because I think it's the spiritual messages are much clearer in the higher degrees, and I think that's, well, those messages in the higher degrees, they show you that the same kind of approach is valid and even intended for the craft and the Royal Arch. I mean, I'm thinking about the Red Cross of Constantine, for instance, the Impendent Orders. It actually tells you that there's a deeper interpretation of the craft and Royal Arch. And I love the Royal Order of Scotland as well. I mean, it's just wonderful.
Yeah, it is, indeed.
So the deeper messages are obvious in places like that, for me. Mm.
Thank you. Tony Baker.
Yes.
Who do you look at for inspiration today? Who inspires you? Or what inspires you?
Well, I mean, I'm going right back to the beginning here. I mean, my father definitely inspires me. I mean, not many a day goes past where I don't think about him. He taught me right from wrong. He told me how to deal with other people. He told me about the importance of the truth and honesty. And not many days go past that I don't think about him.
Wow.
But I think the thing about books, is that all sorts of people can, from the past, can influence you and inspire you today. And I mean, the people who inspire me are the Masonic writers, W.L. Wilmshurst, for instance, hugely important figure in the interpretation of Masonry. J.S.M. Ward.
Yeah.
I mean,
apologies for that.
Don't worry. I mean, both of them are from the 1920s. That was a great 1920s and 30s, I suppose. A great sort of period for interpretation. Kirk McNulty, who died, last year. I think he wrote Journey Through Ritual and Symbol.
Yeah.
And The Way of the Craftsman, which is a bit more difficult, but really, really interesting, I think. And actually today, I really like Craig Wakeman. I think his book A Journey in Stone is really worth a read.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. And but apart from Masons, I mean, I've always admired dogged determination and perseverance, Antonio. So I'm always impressed by people like John Harrison, for instance, the great horologist who made his chronometers to solve the longitude problem. And more mundanely, I suppose, today Marcus Rashford. I think I think he's a hugely admirable young man. Actually, he's doing a lot to help other people.
And
it's a very privileged position that he appreciates. I think he should have had a knighthood in the Queen's birthday honours, actually.
He probably will. He's
he's
a fascinating character.
He's hugely impressive, I think.
I mean, having managed to bring the government to do something that they actually didn't want to do, and without naming politician or prime minister of today. But I totally agree with you.
Not bad for a 20-something-year-old, is it?
It's amazing. It's really amazing. He's using the power of technology and communication actually to bring something right to young generation. He's going to definitely inspire a lot of the young people.
Yes, hope so.
Yeah.
Should be a Mason.
I agree with you. Dear Tony, it has been a pleasure and an honor meeting with you, learning about your work and your thinking. I truly appreciated it. I like the way that you bring forward your own story, translate in the work that you're doing, even though I'm sure that there will be more to be learned, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to meet again soon. Therefore, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being so open and honest during our conversation. And I look forward for our next opportunity to record a conversation together.
Well, I have to say thank you too, Antonio. I've enormously enjoyed meeting you. And, I hope it'll be the beginning of a lasting friendship.